watching ITV Gold and I'm your host Aditi Lamba, and today we have a very interesting and a very educational segment for all our South Asian viewers. On the show today, we are joined by personal injury attorney Sani Popat from the Law Office of Sani Popat in Floral Park, Queens, New York. On the show today, he comes to us to really educate and raise awareness about what happens if you have an accident and you need to seek help through a lawyer. Or what are other things that we should know in terms of personal injury and so much more law services that are provided by personal injury attorney Sani Popat. So let's welcome on the show, we have with us attorney Sani Popat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me today.
It's so interesting and amazing to have a South Asian attorney come and talk to us about very regular but very important topics. At times, sometimes, we bring in attorneys and we're talking about very huge topics such as immigration and politics, and we often forget that there's such a huge range of need for help. So it's really amazing to have you here today to talk to us about those interesting topics and also really reach out to our viewers about what is exactly personal injury, when is that people should seek help, and why is it so important for our community to really understand what their rights are and how to exercise it. So just opening up this platform, what kind of inspired you to get in this field, and give us a little insight into how has this field of personal injury law, served you?
Yeah. So as I was younger, I was actually raised in Queens as well. My parents brought me here when I was 6 months old, so I'm a Queens native. And in the South Asian community, generally speaking, since I was younger, I always wanted to become a lawyer to help others, and that's how it kind of transpired over time. I started my educational background at Hofstra University and ultimately graduated from Touro Law School. And, I kind of found myself in handling accident cases and representing victims that are involved in accidents. And I kind of find a sense of relief by helping those type of people and educating them in terms of what the process is, the timeline involved, and what their rights are essentially. Whenever they're involved in an accident.
So just talk a little bit more about it. When you are talking in terms of accidents, this is an issue that happens on a daily basis. There are thousands of cases coming in. When is it that somebody needs to seek a lawyer for help when it comes to personal injury?
Okay, in my opinion, they need to seek help immediately after an accident. The reason being is that whenever you're involved in an accident, there's several things that need to be done right away. And you have the insurance companies, some of the larger ones like Geico, State Farm, all of them have a process in place which they tend to follow immediately after an accident. And by follow, they may call you, ask you for a statement. They may send an investigator to the scene to take pictures, and what they're trying to do essentially is they're trying to protect themselves and their policy limits and their insured. However, the individual such as yourself that's involved in the accident, there's no one really working for you right away, and there's a lot of stuff that happens immediately after an accident that's critical, because you may go to, file a lawsuit and ultimately go to trial on a case, which may happen a year, 2 years, 5 years later.
Yeah.
And as a lawyer, it's our job to present all the evidence to the jury and explain how your accident happened, what was involved, the injuries that you've sustained. And that type of critical evidence is usually available immediately after an accident happens. So kind of preserving that evidence, kind of knowing what to do immediately after the accident is important, and you should kind of reach out to an attorney immediately after an accident just to explore your rights, because even if you're at fault, there's certain aspects of an accident that you just want to kind of understand and be knowledgeable on.
Would you say that most people do approach the attorney in these cases, or would you actually say that most people actually don't? What is your sort of experience when you do deal with these cases? When do you usually see most of these cases come to you?
So it really depends and varies, but in my opinion, again, reaching out to an attorney immediately is critical given the evidence involved and kind of trying to understand how to navigate the process. In terms of cases that I get, sometimes people call me, the day after an accident. Some people call me 3 years after, and sometimes
3 years.
Yeah, and sometimes the statute of limitations may have expired, which doesn't allow you to bring a lawsuit anymore. So it really varies. But again, it's the people that come to me sooner. Those are the ones that kind of protect themselves, in a orderly fashion and in a timely manner.
Let me ask you a question. Is there a level of what kind of accidents or what kind of injuries definitely should be reported right away to an attorney? Because obviously the insurances hear it, the police enforcement officials involved hear it. Is there a level that you think our audiences should know? And when we're talking about accidents and we're talking about your law firm particularly, what are those areas that you target?
So in terms of injury specifically, unfortunately, we're not doctors, right? I'm a lawyer, and then my clients usually are not physicians. So you can't really diagnose yourself and kind of identify whether you're really injured or not. But my advice is that if you have any sort of pain or discomfort, whether it be to your back, neck, if you've obviously sustained a fracture due to a fall, car accident, and so forth, you should immediately seek the assistance of counsel, because we can kind of navigate you, help you find doctors if needed to kind of address those injuries. And it may turn out that it's nothing, or it may turn out that you have a significant injury that probably requires surgical intervention or some other form of medical attention. But I do get clients from time to time that tend to, I would say, downplay their injury and say, oh, it's just my neck, my back.
Yeah.
And it hurts a lot, but I'll be fine. I think ignoring it's not the best thing. A lot of times getting medical attention from a provider is important, because they kind of diagnose you. They'll do MRIs, X-rays to identify the injury and try to give you the treatment that you need so that you're better long term and not just today.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fear of a lot of people, and an experience I think developed by experience by most of us is, most of us have been in some minor or major accident in which we have all, me including, thought that I was just okay. And months later, a pain comes back, and then you're trying to figure out who is going to pay for a bill if it increases. Is that what you're trying to address? Perhaps if you don't address the attorney at the right time, you may be missing out on an injury that actually needs help.
Yeah, so one of the processes after an accident is reporting the injuries to the insurance company. And the insurance company usually records your statement and takes notes of what injuries you've sustained. So right after an accident, an important process is reporting the injuries to an insurance company. A lot of times they record the statement. So complaining of all of your pain and symptoms and injuries is very important, because they kind of use that against you later if you don't mention certain symptoms. For example, if all of a sudden 3 months later you have back pain, but you had that from the outset and you didn't mention it, they hold that against you. They may say that, hey, you've been injured due to some other source, or maybe you fell somewhere else, or some other pre-existing condition has caused your injuries. So, addressing all of your injuries from the outset is critical.
And just a little bit talking more about when the accidents happen, we're talking about certain things that you should do when the injury takes place, which is to make sure you reach out to an attorney if you're feeling something or if that has happened. Also see what other personal help you need, medical help you need. But there must be certain things that you shouldn't do after an accident, correct? And I really want to bring that attention to everyone, because I'm pretty sure those are certain mistakes that we often make.
Yes.
I just want to open up the platform to you, Mr. Saini. Just give us a little insight into what kind of incidents have you seen amongst your clients that you really wish people shouldn't do right after an accident?
So right after an accident, a lot of times the police report is critical. And when the police respond to the scene of an accident, in terms of how you report that accident, that statement's going to be a part of the police report. So it's very critical that your version of the accident is as accurate as possible. Understand that if you admit certain level of fault, that also will be a part of the police report and held against you later on when you decide to pursue a claim or a lawsuit. Additionally, one critical mistake that people make is that normally right after an accident, if there's a police report generated, an insurance company will call you and they'll try to get a recorded statement from you. And in that recorded statement, they want to find out two things basically. They want to find out how the accident happened and what are the injuries that were sustained. In terms of how the accident happened, their goal is to basically manipulate the facts to try to get some fault on you so that they can pay less at the end or accept less responsibility. And in speaking with them and without speaking to a lawyer, kind of doing yourself a disservice, because to really get your voice heard and the truth out, essentially, you want to make sure that you kind of review what you're going to say,
Right.
and then kind of provide them with that information. But if you're not experienced and the way they're trained to ask these questions, you're going to put yourself in a bigger bind. So my advice is that, again, reach out to an attorney immediately, my office, a personal injury lawyer, to kind of explore your options and review how the accident happened before you give that critical statement. Also, on the other end, you may give a statement about your injuries, and a lot of people tend to say a day after the accident, I'm fine, I don't feel any pain.
Yeah.
Even if they're feeling some pain, some level of pain. You shouldn't do that either, because all of a sudden you're saying you're totally fine, and a week later when you start developing that back pain, that you have the back pain from the outset that gets more critical later, they're going to use that statement against you, that you said that you're totally fine. So a lot of times when my office represents individuals that are involved in accidents, we don't give recorded statements because we're not required to. And we kind of give them as little information as we need to kind of protect your rights, so that if later, should you realize that you're more injured than you are, we can kind of present that in an orderly fashion as well.
And also the mental state of a person during that time period, when they're nervous, when they're fearful, they could be hurt, they're, whatever is involved with the accident. I'm sure all of that, must put so much more pressure. Isn't that even more of a reason to make sure you're being very careful about what you're saying, to a police officer or an insurance agent?
Yes, and that's critical. See, what happens with whenever you're involved in an accident, if there's insurance involved, their goal ultimately is to save as many dollars as they can on their policy limits, which covers the loss essentially. And they'll do anything to do that. So that's the issue. And you have to kind of make sure that you, again, present it in the best manner possible so that they don't hold it against you.
Another question for you in this regards would be, is a case too big or too small to be taken up by a law firm? And also, what is usually the worth of anyone's case? How should someone determine if it's a huge process when they have to go through, and there's a lot of factors involved. When should somebody sort of pay attention to how big of a case they should bring up?
Okay, I will answer that question, but to go back to your last question as well,
Right.
and to add to that, when someone's involved in an accident, usually they have that fear, anxiety, they're in pain and so forth, they're confused. And when you come to a lawyer, essentially, we kind of sit down and dissect all of that and get to the issue of how the accident happened and what the injuries are. A tactic that a lot of the insurance companies also have is they draw on that fear and anxiety. And how do they do that? Sometimes they'll send an investigator to you and try to settle your case with you for a lot less, $500, $1,000, just to give you a nominal value. And they'll have you sign a paper called a release. And in that release, you're essentially giving up your right to pursue a case against the individual that's responsible for your accident, as well as the insurance company. And it's actually a tactic that they use in-house, because again, if they get you to sign that paper right away, you just blew your whole case. Wow. Also, they may explain it inaccurately to you and say, hey, just sign here, this is just so we can pay your medical bills. But the issue is, in the release, the language is not written so that an ordinary person can really understand it easily. It's really written in legalese. And if you sit down with a lawyer, what that release normally says is that, hey, I'm giving up all of my rights, I can't sue you ever, and I will accept this little amount of consideration as a result, and kind of walk away from everything else, which is really sad in my opinion, because if you were to consult with an attorney, you can have a better understanding of what your case is actually worth. Now, to
Does
answer,
this happen a lot? Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
it is happening more and more, unfortunately.
wow.
And I've actually been successful in fighting the insurance companies to undo what they've done. But again, what ends up happening is, you create more hurdles in your case, and we kind of have to go back to the court and say, look, my client signed this release, they didn't understand their rights at the time, and so forth. And if you can undo it and let them pursue a claim, but a court is less inclined to do that sometimes, because they'll say, hey, this is legal and it's binding because you've signed this agreement, and in the agreement it says that I've read this fully, I understand it, I've decided not to pursue an attorney, and that I'm accepting whatever you're giving me as a result of this accident. So that's one. In terms of what injuries are worth and whether a case is too big or too small, that's really up to the attorney to make a determination. And that's based on our level of experience. I've settled cases and pursued cases at trial in the six-figure range, and I've settled cases on the lower end also. It just depends on the injury, the extent of the injury, what treatment you receive, whether there's surgical intervention, whether you have lost wages. We also consider your past pain and suffering, future pain and suffering, future medical bills. So all of these are factors that are considered in anyone's lawsuit or claim, essentially, to decide what a case is worth. Also, to kind of guide us of what a case is worth, one is our past experience, and the second thing is there's something called jury verdicts, where we can look up verdicts to see what other juries have awarded plaintiffs in a case that's similar. The plaintiff is the injured individual. That's who's called the plaintiff, and the defendant in the lawsuit is the person that you sue. But the plaintiff, we can kind of look up prior verdicts to see, okay, if someone's had, for example, a fractured wrist with surgery, what has a jury awarded for that type of injury? Then we can kind of go around that and say, okay, we can add these variables and those variables, but we kind of come up to a determination, discuss that with the client in detail so that they're comfortable at the end of the day with what the number is and work that way. And ultimately, sometimes it's really up to the jury to decide, and the jury is made up of, a panel of people, of your peers and the community that kind of look at the case, how it happened, what your injuries are, the factors involved, and all of the evidence, and kind of make an award based on that.
Have you had to take many cases to trials?
Yeah, so what happens is anytime a case, I'd like to describe it more as a client than a case. Anytime a client comes to my office, and in my office, the policy is that we don't treat people as cases, we treat them as clients, because they're individuals with specific issues in their situation, and we want to try to give that personal attention to everyone. So that's why we treat them as clients. So when a client comes to my office, ultimately, what we kind of decide is that, we look at the factors involved in the accident, kind of make a determination, kind of hold their hand throughout the process.
Right.
So that's what it comes down to. Anytime a client walks into my office and I have a case, I start preparing for trial day one, because that's the mentality you have to have.
Oh, wow.
You need the evidence to basically prove your case at trial, so you might as well start with it day one. In terms of what cases actually go to trial and which cases settle, a majority of cases do settle before trial, but that's not the approach that I take as a lawyer. I almost prepare every case for trial, and I think that's very important.
And you're just talking about trials and talking about this entire process that one needs if they are in an accident or if there is a personal injury that has, harmed them. My question now would be probably something that the viewers probably want to know is the costs attached to all the services and the amount of process it takes. It's not cheap.
Yes.
And it's something that could be very draining on someone economically, while they're also going through a personal injury, which is already, sort of hindering their growth and success during that time period. I would love for you to sort of give us an insight into if we were, if there was a client looking for help and they were to approach your law firm, how could they be helped financially in all of that support?
Okay, so the good news is that ultimately my firm works on a contingency basis, and what that means is that if I do not win your case or recover any money for you, you do not owe me a cent.
Oh,
okay?
wow.
So I totally work on a pure contingency basis. You don't have to pay me anything. The only time I get paid is when I recover money. If for some reason I pursue your case and we go into it for 3-4 years, and all of a sudden we decide, or a jury decides, that you're not entitled to anything, I don't get paid anything for that, and nor do you owe me any money. And my retainer clearly explains that. So that's how confident I am in your case when I take it.
Wow.
And the other aspect is, as far as the fees involved with cases and hiring expert witnesses, and also investing in investigators and sending out people to look at the scene of the accident and preparing trial exhibits and getting your medical records, all of that is laid out by my firm. And again, the only way I recover my expenses is in the event that there's a recovery. If there's no recovery, you don't owe me anything. That's the approach I have, yes.
Wow, I have to ask you, could you give us a little insight into the team that works with you? Because to take on cases, and keep them until you have a final verdict and, getting paid basically based on that. I would love for you to sort of, if you could share a few moments with us on how you've established this kind of a system, because we don't often hear about this.
Yeah, so with the system in place, again, certain cases get resolved sooner, others don't. We have support staff at our office that basically help us monitor these cases with other attorneys and myself. And I'm in court almost every day, basically, on these cases, pursuing them, going to conferences, filing motions with the court to get certain issues resolved. And sometimes it becomes a lengthy process. But again, if you believe in yourself and your client, we fight all the way till the end. And we don't roll over in front of the insurance company. So that's very important for us. And that's the reputation that we've earned.
How has it been for you as a South Asian, active practicing attorney here in the Queens, New York area? With such a diverse community around and having so much heritage attached, and then giving it back in this field, I would love for you to sort of reflect on that. How has it the entire experience being South Asian and being in the law field been for you?
So in terms of the South Asian attorney, so I'm in court almost every day, and very rarely do you see attorneys that are South Asian in the courtroom. But as a litigator, I've developed a reputation to basically be the voice of my community and go in there and fight for my clients and make sure that they have their day in court at the end of the day, and I think that's critical. Also, what's very important is that in my profession, a lot of times clients are kind of weary of attorneys and not too comfortable. But whenever a client that is of South Asian descent sees me, automatically there's a level of comfort. And, the fact that I can speak certain languages, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, English, that kind of helps in terms of a communication point of view. But yeah, so that's what it is basically.
I have to say, what is your take on this growing number of South Asian attorney body over the last few years? There are so many young aspirants, so many more South Asians in the fields of law, in law school. Any advice or personal takes you'd like to share about being a South Asian in that field?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, in terms of being in the legal profession, South Asians are a minority, and we got to kind of change that on a day-to-day basis and educate ourselves and kind of rise through the ladders and of the different educational institutions. And for the younger generation that wants to become lawyers, believe in yourself. You got to push through. You got to put the time in, but the rewards are there at the end of the day. But it's a lot of hard work, and there's not much glamour at the end of the day. In our profession, I speak to a lot of other lawyers, and it's tough. The profession is tough, and they ask me, how do I do it every day? And my response is, I actually love what I do, and every morning I get up and I'm excited to go to work. So you kind of have to, if you're going into the profession because you think it's lucrative, or you think you're doing it just to make money, it's not my advice to go into the profession. But if you truly have a passion for helping people, being their voice, being able to communicate for them and representing them effectively, then yes, you should pursue law school and kind of make your dreams come true and set a mark. That's important.
And maybe have an amazing law firm just like him, where you're really talking about helping clients, you're talking about really providing the services. I would love for you to, give an appeal out to our viewers for anyone that could be, a victim of an accident, any resources that are available through your offices. I would love for our viewers to know.
Yeah, so we have, we'll share my phone number, and ultimately you can always call me after an accident for legal advice, and I can kind of guide you and inform you and see what the best options are depending on your specific situation. But we're always available. It can be at any time. Some people are involved in an accident at nighttime, daytime, and whenever it is, we're always here answering our calls basically. And I answer most of my calls myself just so that I can have that initial contact with my clients and kind of assess their situation right away.
So just talking a bit more about accidents and its causes and its impact on the communities. Before we go into getting some helpful tips from you, I kind of want to bring the focus on our South Asian community as we're talking about it on ITV Gold. Have you noticed a kind of a trend perhaps, or certain things that you always see with South Asian communities? We often call them as the community at unrest, or the community too fearful to ever approach anyone when they are in harm. So I would love for you to reflect upon your own personal experience with South Asians. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, so when it comes to an accident with our members of our community, what ends up happening is a lot of them are fearful for multiple reasons. One of the main reasons is their insurance going to go up? Okay, and that's a myth. Okay, what ends up happening is a lot of times if you're involved in an accident, it's not your fault. It's very unlikely that your insurance rates are going to be raised due to an accident that's not your fault, first of all. Second of all, if an accident is not your fault, you're pursuing the insurance company for the individual that caused your harm and your injuries. So it's not even your insurance policy that's in effect, it's the insurance policy of the other individual. So kind of being fearful that your rates may go up if you pursue a claim, in my opinion, it's not the best approach. You kind of have to speak with an attorney and go over the situations to see whether you have a viable case or not. And another aspect I see with clients a lot of times, they're concerned about their legal status, and they say, oh, we're undocumented.
Yeah.
Can we pursue a case?
That's a huge portion of the South Asian community right now that we're talking about. Undocumented immigrants at unrest. What happens when they need help? Should they even go out and seek help from law enforcement or from attorneys? I know I kind of intruded this while you were speaking, but what's your take on that?
So when we pursue a case, first of all, it's not a criminal case, it's a civil case. That's one. Second of all, in order to pursue a case for your injuries, your legal status is really irrelevant. You don't have to have a green card or citizenship to pursue a case for your injuries. And you're not going to be deported if you pursue a case. This has nothing to do with your legal status. This has to do with the harm that was caused to you and your injuries, essentially. And again, your legal status has no bearing on your case, essentially.
But would it have an issue on their insurances? Do they still have insurances, these clients that may not have the legal status?
Well, they may have insurance. They may live with a household relative that has insurance that may cover them under that policy, because generally speaking, for example, if you have an automobile policy, it usually covers the person that's on the policy,
Correct.
which is the insured, as well as household relatives, which may be children, mothers, fathers, and so forth, that may be covered in the policy. But that's, again, the job of an attorney to kind of look into the situation, explore the different types of insurance policies that are available to pursue.
So just talking a little bit more about, trying to figure out how to get help and how the legal status is actually not something that's needed for them to approach an attorney. My question again would be, who ends up paying some of those medical bills while the accident happened? And even after that, because, as we're talking about, a lot of this personal injury really impacts these clients, and they are impacted for quite a while afterwards.
So it really depends on the type of accident. For example, if you have an automobile accident, there's something called no-fault insurance that's built into your own policy, and you pay for it, which essentially says that irrespective of whose fault the accident is, the medical bills are going to be paid through your own insurance policy. It will not raise your rates because, again, it's called no-fault insurance. That's the insurance that's endorsed in every policy in the state of New York. That policy covers up to $50,000 in medical bills, as well as lost wages, which means that if you miss time due to an accident from work, you can submit disability notes from your doctor and get paid for the time that you're out of work. What's also covered is like mileage reimbursement to and from doctors. If you're involved in like a slip and fall and trip and fall, usually the insurance company that covers the building or the location you fell at has a medical pay provision in their insurance policy, which will kind of cover the bills. And if there's no insurance, then the last resort is you probably use your own health insurance, depending on if you have private health insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, etc., to pay for the medical bills. And if all else fails, a lot of times doctors will do liens or something along those lines to help you with the medical bills. But generally speaking, the bills are normally covered by an insurance company. So getting treatment, you shouldn't be fearful of it because you're not paying for it. There's an insurance company that's going to be covering your medical bills. What's most important is that you attend to your medical needs and kind of get evaluated and get checked out to see what the issues are and get the appropriate medical treatment so that your injuries do not linger forever. A lot of injuries don't just go away, and there's,
Right.
you got to get treatment, and there's different forms of treatment, whether it be surgery, whether it be physical therapy, whether it be pain management, injections, or medication. It just depends. There's different forms of treatment, but again, speaking to an attorney and kind of coming up with a plan on how you're going to approach that is very important.
Because there's literally no way for any of us to actually know what to do when an accident happened. All these provisions we wouldn't even know. It's very, very important. Wouldn't you say that?
Exactly. And another important provision in insurance policies, which people are very unaware of, is that if you look at for example, your car insurance policy, and this is very critical and important advice, okay? There's different layers of coverage in your policy. The liability portion of your insurance policy for your automobile covers you in the event that you're at fault for an accident. There's also a portion called PIP, which is personal injury protection, which covers the medical bills and so forth, and there's a limitation on that coverage and the amount in the policy. The other important coverage that you have is, and this is the most important coverage, it's called SUM coverage, supplementary uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. What does that mean? I'm going to tell you briefly what it means, but it's very critical that you look at this endorsement in your policy.
Right.
This covers you essentially. So in the event that you're involved in an accident, for example, and someone causes an accident, rear ends your vehicle, for example, they're 100% at fault, and they cause you injuries where you need a back surgery, for example, your injuries are worth several hundreds of $1,000s. That individual that hit you, let's just assume he has the minimum coverage for liability, which is $25,000 in the state of New York.
Okay.
All of a sudden, that's your recovery against the person, essentially, unless you pursue a judgment against them individually, and if they don't have any assets, you're really left with that $25,000. The question is that amount of money sufficient to cover you if you've had a back surgery? I'd say no, right? That's
right.
Unfortunate. You may be disabled the rest of your life. What is $25,000 really going to do for you? Now, the portion of the policy that you can protect yourself is in the case that the person has a lower coverage is that SUM policy. That kicks in only after the initial liability policy is exhausted. And now your own coverage in your policy, you can have as much coverage as you need. Most people, unfortunately, again, because they don't understand how insurance policies work, they have the minimum coverage. You need to raise that coverage because that coverage, in the event that someone is underinsured, meaning they have less insurance for what your injuries are worth.
Correct.
Once their insurance company gives you their policy limits and kind of settles your case for that, you can still go after your own insurance policy for more recovery due to your injuries. And a good question is, how much coverage should I have? That really depends on you and how much you think you're worth. It's a risk that you take every day. In my opinion, everyone should have at least $1 million in coverage. If you undergo back surgery, is even $1 million anything? If you can't go back to work ever and you're disabled the rest of your life, how is even $1 million helping you? But you should have at least that. You shouldn't have 25,000. I think it's kind of, you do yourself a disservice. And the unfortunate part is a lot of people, they don't realize, but to increase your SUM limits, the uninsured and underinsured motorist limits, the cost of doing so is not substantial. So if you're already paying a premium for your policy and you increase that SUM limit, your policy actually doesn't go up substantially in terms of the policy premium. So you should really look into it. And insurance companies actually don't want you to increase your limits because their reward in you increasing your limits is a negative net effect. They get a little bit more money in premium, but you get a lot more coverage at the end of the day. And they don't really want you to know that. And it's up to you to educate yourself, and as well as insurance brokers, to explain to their clients what limits are and what limits they have,
right?
So that you're adequately protected.
But Mr. Seni, who should they go to for advice in certain situations such as this? If it is about, a prevalent topic as in what should be your insurance and how do you protect yourself in a moment of a tragedy or any kind of issues. So who should somebody really seek out to?
So the unfortunate part is that if you're trying to protect yourself after the accident happened,
Yeah,
it's too
it's
late.
too late.
You have to have that coverage in effect prior. And again, speaking to insurance brokers is important. You should get someone knowledgeable that understands and can explain what coverages you have and what they mean. And a lot of people in our community, unfortunately, they want the cheapest insurance, which is not the best route, because again, in the event that you're involved in an accident, that's when it really matters, and you just never know. And it's a risk that you take every day, and you gotta kind of have to protect yourself against that risk. And the unfortunate part is also in your insurance policy, you have something called the liability portion, which again, the minimum in state of New York that's requires $25,000. That's the policy that covers you in the case that you're negligent and you caused the accident. Now, if you're a person of high net worth that has assets, okay, for example, you own a home, you have a business, and you cause an accident, essentially a motor vehicle accident, you have only $25,000 in coverage, that injured party can sue you and seek a judgment against you, and all of a sudden you can lose your home, your business, and everything else.
Wow.
So to have adequate insurance, you should also up that portion so that you make sure you're protected. And this is just general advice for people so that they can somewhat protect themselves from unforeseeable circumstances.
I really hope many viewers, including myself, go ahead and look at our insurance policies and really navigate if we need extra help. I would love for you to give some helpful tips that all our viewers of ITV Gold can really learn from in terms of this, because this is something that could happen to anybody. It deals with, many aspects for insurance. This is something that, a person like me should also be looking into on an everyday basis. It's preventative measures to ensure that we're living a safe and healthy life. So I would love for you to share some tips if you are willing to.
So a couple of tips. When you're involved in an accident, again, like I said, first thing is reach out to a lawyer so that, we can protect your rights essentially and preserve a lot of the evidence that's available from the outset. That evidence is going to be critical at trial. That's one. So reaching out to a lawyer is the number one step that you need to take after an accident. The second thing is be careful what you say, because any statements that you give to investigators, on a police report, to police personnel, statements that you provide at a hospital, for example, I'm not injured, when you're really feeling back pain or neck pain or other types of injury. Don't minimize your injuries, because all of those records are going to come into play later in your case. That's another thing. Also, make sure you try to take pictures at the accident scene if you're injured. I know it's difficult. Maybe you have a relative there, or call someone to help you kind of secure photographs of the accident scene. That's very critical a lot of times. Also, if there's any witnesses, you kind of want to get that information also, because they can come into play and kind of be that independent third party at your trial that can testify and kind of explain what really happened that day at the accident scene and so forth. Another thing is that you want to make sure that that you take pictures, that you preserve the statements, be careful what you say in terms of giving a police statement, and kind of just reach out to a lawyer right away. That's the most important, critical step. And also, you got to basically take care of yourself and address your injuries. Don't be afraid to go to the hospital. Don't be afraid to take that ambulance to emergency room if you're injured. Again, there's different forms of insurance that will likely cover your claim if you have insurance, or through no fault, and other aspects that I've already discussed.
Definitely. And again, the law offices of Sani Popat is located in Floral Park, Queens, New York. So do visit the office or give them a call if you have a lot more, questions in regards to this. I'm sure we weren't able to cover a lot, but we gave you a general, description of, what advice and tips you can follow. So make sure you reach out to Mr. Sani Popat for more information.